Close your eyes for a moment. Not the darkness behind your eyelids, not the darkness of a bedroom with the curtains drawn. Something else. The darkness of a world with no electricity, no streetlights, no phone screens, no distant city glow. Absolute darkness. The kind that presses against your skin. The kind that has weight. That is what night was for 99% of human history. Not a dimmer version of day, a different world entirely. One that arrived every evening without warning and lasted until the sun decided it was done. Every human who ever lived before the last 200 years knew this darkness personally. They built their entire lives around it. Their sleep, their food, their gods, their stories, their way of being together. All of it shaped by the dark. And then, in 1879, Thomas Edison turned on a light. And in the time it took a filament to glow, we walked away from 200,000 years without looking back. But before the light bulb, there was fire. And fire changed the night long before Edison erased it. The evidence for controlled human fire use goes back at least 1 million years, possibly further. Sites at Wonderwork Cave in South Africa show evidence of burning materials in layers dated to around 1 million years ago. That is not a campfire. That is a technology, one that arrived before language was fully formed, before our skulls had reached their modern shape, before we were entirely us. And what fire did to the night was not just practical. It was not just warmth, not just predator deterrence, not just cooked food. Fire created something that had never existed before, a circle, a bounded social space in the darkness where faces were visible and the world beyond was not. Inside the firelight, people. Outside the firelight, everything else. That boundary changed human psychology in ways we are still living with. The circle around a fire is not a modern invention. It is an ancient memory running in every one of us, whether we know it or not. In 2014, an anthropologist named Polly Weissner published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that quietly rearranged the way researchers think about what fire actually did to human social behavior. Weissner had spent decades studying the Juhwanzi Bushmen of the Kalahari region of southern Africa, one of the last hunter-gatherer populations still living largely as our ancestors did. She recorded their conversations, thousands of hours of them, during the day and at night, by firelight. Then she analyzed what the conversations were about. The difference was stark. Daytime conversations among the Juhwanzi were dominated by practical matters: food, tools, resource complaints, territory, the logistics of survival, necessary, functional, largely impersonal. Firelight conversations were something else entirely. At night, around the fire, the Jew/Hwanzi talked about people, stories, relationships, distant communities. They told jokes. They discussed the spiritual world. They sang. They dramatized events from the past. They imagined scenarios that hadn't happened. Weissner found that 81% of daytime conversation was about economic matters and complaints. At night, around the fire, 81% of conversation was about people, stories, and social bonds. The same mouths, the same brains. A completely different mind, activated by firelight. Here is what that means. For most of human history, the hours between sunset and sleep were the hours in which humans became fully human. Not the hours of survival, the hours of story, of myth, of collective imagination, of deciding together who we were and what the world meant. Robin Dunbar, the evolutionary psychologist famous for identifying the social group size of 150, has argued that language itself may have evolved primarily as a tool for social bonding in exactly these kinds of firelit settings. That the campfire conversation is not just entertainment. It is the original social technology. The mechanism by which early humans maintained relationships with more people than daily grooming could sustain. Before language, social bonding required physical contact, touch, grooming, proximity. You could only maintain bonds with the people your hands could reach. Firelight changed the arithmetic. In the flickering dark, you could bond with 20 people simultaneously, through laughter, through story, through song, through the shared experience of being frightened together and deciding not to be. That is what the firelit hours gave us. But ancient humans did not simply talk until they fell asleep. The structure of the night was more interesting than that. In 2001, historian Roger E. Kirch of Virginia Tech published a landmark paper that recovered something most modern people have completely forgotten. For most of human history, people did not sleep in a single unbroken block. They slept in two phases, first sleep and second sleep. First sleep began shortly after dark, usually a few hours after sunset. It lasted 3 to 4 hours. Then people woke, naturally, without alarm, in the quiet middle of the night, and the interval between first sleep and second sleep was not considered a problem. It was not insomnia. It was not a malfunction. It was expected, a known and named part of the night. Historical records across multiple cultures refer to this interval explicitly, as the watch, as the dorvée, as the midnight hours, a time recognized as different from waking and from sleeping. Second sleep began after this interval and lasted until dawn. The pattern was so universal and so consistent that Kirch found references to it in medieval medical texts, court records, literary works, and diaries spanning 6 centuries across Europe, Asia, and Africa. The single block sleep we consider normal is not an ancient human pattern. It is a modern industrial invention. So what did ancient humans do in that interval? In those quiet hours between first sleep and second sleep, Kirch's research found evidence of a remarkable range. Some people prayed, some lay still and thought, some had sex, some visited neighbors, some interpreted their dreams, which were reported as unusually vivid in this interval. Some wrote, some simply listened to the night, the darkness, the wind, the sounds of creatures outside. There is medical evidence to support why this interval felt distinct. The brain during this period shows elevated levels of prolactin, a hormone associated with calm, meditative wakefulness. The state described in historical accounts as peaceful, dreamlike, deeply present, something that modern humans have almost no access to in a world that does not allow the night to arrive. And then there are the paintings. The oldest art ever made by human hands was not painted in daylight. It was painted underground, in complete and total darkness, except for torches. The cave paintings of Lascaux, Altamira, and Chauvet were created deep inside cave systems where natural light never reached. In flickering torchlight, in narrow passages, in spaces that required crawling to enter. Archaeologist Ian Davidson has noted that the positioning of many painted animals in these caves was deliberately chosen so that the uneven rock surface created the impression of movement when a flame passed over it. The paintings were not meant to be seen in still, bright light. They were designed for torchlight, for the dancing, uncertain illumination of a flame moving through a cave, for darkness. The first gallery of human art was built inside the night, and the people who painted it understood something about darkness and imagination that we have almost entirely forgotten. Here is what the darkness did that daylight could not. It narrowed the world. In daylight, the world is vast, threatening, full of movement and demand. In the circle of a fire at night, the world shrank to the faces in the firelight, and the mind, freed from the vigilance of day, turned inward, toward story, toward memory, toward the imagined. The neuroscientist David Eagleman has noted that the human brain processes faces more deeply and emotionally in low-light conditions. That something in our ancient wiring treats firelit faces as uniquely significant, uniquely worth attending to. And then Edison flipped the switch, and the ancient night was over. Not immediately, not all at once. But within 2 generations of widespread electrical lighting, the 2-sleep pattern had disappeared. The firelit conversation hour had been replaced by television, then phones, then endless scroll. The quiet interval between sleeps had been diagnosed as insomnia. The cave paintings were lit by fluorescent tubes so tourists could view them in safety and comfort. We didn't lose the dark reluctantly. We fled it. And in fleeing it, we walked away from the social technology that built language, the sleep pattern we evolved over 200,000 years, and the quiet hours that may have been the most meditative state available to the human mind. We traded all of that for a light switch, and most of us never knew it was gone. The next time you sit around a fire after dark, notice what happens to the conversation, how it slows, how it deepens, how it turns towards story. That is not nostalgia. That is memory. 200,000 years of it, waking up the moment the light goes out and the circle closes, and the faces of the people you are with become the only thing in the world worth looking at.